Ani, Adele Loosemore Indijnakas, Shebahonaning and Donjaba. Hello, my name is Adele Loosemore and I'm a Treaty Indian from Shebahonaning. My community is located at the entrance to the North Channel of Georgian Bay in the Robinson-Huron Treaty area. Today, my community is more widely known as Killarney, Ontario. A couple of years ago, I uploaded a video about a false statement MNO made in their historical summary of their historic Métis community of Georgian Bay and environs. In this video, I'm revisiting that statement because of information I found in a publication by MNO about the Killarney and environs historic Métis community. In the fall of 2022, Canadian Geographic published an article written by the Métis Nation of Ontario called Rivers of Resistance. MNO and Canadian Geographic also issued this map, showing the locations of MNO's historic Métis communities. There's a historical summary of each one in those colored rectangles you see all around the map. Today, I'm going to talk about part of MNO's description of the historic Métis community of Georgian Bay. Here's a closer view of the Georgian Bay community. The image at the top right is MNO's historical summary. Here's the information I'm focusing on. Outsiders visiting the area in 1830 described the prevalent costume of the Canadian half-breed as a handkerchief twisted around the head, a shirt and pair of trousers with a gay sash. When they say outsiders visiting the area, they're referring to outsiders visiting Penetanguishene, because that's the place named in the sentence just before this one. The yellow dot in the lower right of this map marks the location of Penetanguishene. The words in quotation marks in MNO's summary match exactly the words used by a lady who published a book about her travels. Her name was Anna Jameson. She wrote a book called Winter Studies and Summer Rambles in Canada, all about her travels, including her canoe trips in Lake Huron. So it wasn't outsiders, plural, who talked about the half-breeds. It was one outsider, Mrs. Jameson. And it wasn't in 1830 that she talked about how the Canadian half-breeds were dressed. And she wasn't in Penetanguishene when she made that comment. Mrs. Jameson made her trip around Lake Huron in 1837, as noted in the foreword of her book. I discussed this in detail along with additional information in a video I uploaded to YouTube in 2022. If you want to see it, there's a link to that video in the description box below this one. Fast forward to 2023, when I downloaded a PDF from MNO's website. It's called Primary Source Package, Killarney and Environs Historic Métis Community. There's lots to talk about in this publication, but in this video, I'm limiting my comments to one entry on their timeline. It's near the bottom of page 6, inside the rectangle I added to this image. Here's a close-up view. It says 1837. British author Anna Jameson travels around Lake Huron and comments on the Canadian half-breed voyageurs as she traveled past Killarney. In this version, they've got the year right. They name the outsider, Anna Jameson, but they don't say she's at Penetanguishene. This time, MNO says she's passing Killarney. Let's take another look at the map. A yellow dot still marks the location of Penetanguishene, and I added a red dot at the top of Georgian Bay. That's where Shebahonaning is, known today as Killarney. According to MNO, Mrs. Jameson saying or writing the word half-breed as she traveled past Killarney is a significant event, important enough to include on their historical timeline. But here's the problem. Mrs. Jameson wasn't traveling past Killarney when she said or wrote the word half-breed. She hadn't even left Penetanguishene Bay yet. Penetanguishene is on Manitoulin Island, where I placed the blue dot on this map. She described the annual ceremony of giving presents to Indians that took place there in the summer of 1837. These gifts, given to First Nations people by the British Crown, were meant to mark the alliance among their nations. There's a chapter called Canoe Voyage Down Lake Huron, and on the first page Mrs. Jameson says, "Now, to take things in order, and that you may accompany us in our canoe voyage, I must describe in the first place our arrangements." She takes a whole page and a half to describe the canoes, the baggage in the canoes, the items she brought with her, what the half-breeds are wearing, etc. Then she says, "We started off in swift and gallant style, looking grand and official, with the British flag floating at our stern. Major Anderson and his people, and the schooner's crew, gave us 3 cheers. The person that Jameson calls Major Anderson is most likely to be Captain T.G. Anderson, who in the spring of 1837 had taken charge of what Indian Affairs called the Indian establishment on Manitoulin Island. The Indian Affairs office was at Penetanguishene. It makes perfect sense that he would be waving them off, particularly since Mrs. Jameson's party included Samuel Jarvis, the chief superintendent of Indian Affairs, who was Anderson's boss. It's much later in the day when she describes arriving in Shebahonaning, now called Killarney. About sunset, we came to the hut of a fur trader, whose name, I think, was Lemerandier. It was on the shore of a beautiful channel running between the mainland and a large island. On a neighboring point, Wesawindabe, the Yellowhead, and his people were building their wigwams for the night. The appearance was most picturesque, particularly when the campfires were lighted and the night came on. I cannot forget the figure of a squaw as she stood, dark and tall, against the red flames, bending over a great black kettle, her blanket trailing behind her, her hair streaming on the night breeze, most like to one of the witches in Macbeth. We supped here on excellent trout and whitefish, but the sandflies and mosquitoes were horribly tormenting. The former, which are so diminutive as to be scarcely visible, were by far the worst. We were off next morning by daylight, the Yellowhead's people discharging their rifles in salute. This is the sketch that Mrs. Jameson made of Chief Yellowhead's camp in Shebahonaning. You'll hear more about him in a different video. The writings in Anna Jameson's book show that she was not in the Penetanguishene area when she described the Canadian half-breeds. And she was not traveling past Killarney when she described the Canadian half-breeds. The comments that interest MNO, containing that magical word half-breed, were expressed on the shore of Penetanguishene Bay on Manitoulin Island. I guess that's not the optimal location for MNO, so they ignored Penetanguishene Bay and twisted Anna Jameson's story in the direction of two other places, Killarney and Penetanguishene. MNO's contradictory accounts of Jameson's observations are not different interpretations of historical data. They are misrepresentations of historical data. And that tactic seems to be one of the hallmarks of MNO's work.